The American people are finding it harder and harder to get a mortgage or a home equity line of credit. They are seeing the equity in their homes going down, and they are seeing the values of their savings, including their 401k savings, plummeting. In terms of the energy crisis, the American people have been forced to pay tens of billions of dollars more in inflated energy prices because of the outrageous levels being caused by speculation occurring in unregulated energy markets. Both of these crises are tied to the same extreme economic ideology, an ideology which says that government should play no role or a minimal role in protecting consumers, that we should put all of our trust in the honesty and the integrity of the heads of large multinational corporations. And I should mention that both of these crises are also tied to the work of one former member of the United States Senate, and that is the former chairman of the Senate Banking Committee, Phil Gramm of Texas. And to a significant degree, a lot of what we are experiencing as chairman of the Senate Banking Committee in 1999, then Senator Phil Gramm spearheaded legislation that bears his name, and that's the so-called Gramm-Leach-Bliley bill that broke down critical regulatory safeguards that the government put in place after the Great Depression to prevent exactly what we are experiencing today. President, the time for hand-wringing is over. This Congress needs to put an end to the radical deregulation that was pushed by Senator Phil Gramm and many other Republicans, and there were Democrats who went along with that as well. We need to put the safety walls back up in the financial services sector. We need to deregulate the electronic energy markets. We need to end the use of unregulated credit default swaps. In other words, what we need to do, once again, is have the United States government play an important role in protecting the people of this country against the greed of large corporate interest. Mr. President, unfortunately, the response from the administration and Wall Street is not to do that, but it's to push for further consolidation in the financial services sector. And here's just an amazing thing. I mean, the argument that we're hearing over again is AIG was too big to fail, and what we are now creating are institutions that are even larger than AIG, and 10 years from now, when these institutions are threatened with collapse, there will be people coming up and say, oh my goodness, we just can't allow those to fail. We have got to bail them out as well. Mr. President, this country can no longer afford companies that are too big to fail. If a company is so large that its failure would cause systemic harm to our economy, if it is too big to fail, then it is too big to exist. If it is too big to fail, it is too big to exist. We need, as a Congress, to assess which companies fall in this category. Bank of America is certainly one of them. Finally, in terms of dealing with this unfolding disaster, we need to make sure that working Americans, the middle class, do not foot the bill. If the economic calamity requires a federal bailout, it should be paid for by those people who actually benefited from the reckless behavior of people empowered by the extreme economic views of Senator Gramm, President Bush, and Senator McCain, and many others. In other words, the point that I am making here is that in the last 10 years, many of these people have made billions and billions of dollars. In my view, we need an emergency surtax on those at the very top in order to pay for any losses the federal government suffers as a result of efforts to shore up the economy. It should not be hardworking people who are trying to figure out how they're going to keep their families economically above water, people who are working longer hours for lower wages, people who have lost their health care, people who can't afford to pay their fuel bills this winter. Those are not the people who should be asked to pay for this bailout. Before I complete my remarks, I'd like to step back for a minute and examine this current crisis in the context of who our government represents. What does it say about an administration that is prepared to put $85 billion at risk to bail out AIG, but that fights tooth and nail against dealing with the economic crises facing working families in this country? $85 billion at risk for AIG, some $30 billion for Bear Stearns, perhaps trillions for Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. For those folks, there seems to be an endless supply of money. Don't the American people deserve a government that views their economic needs as being as important as the health of large corporations and Wall Street executives? Since President Bush has been in office, nearly 6 million Americans has slipped out of the middle class and into poverty. What was the administration's response? Was there a bailout for those people who lost good-paying jobs and are now working for significantly lower wages? Did President Bush come up and say, we have got to protect those kids in a society which has the highest rate of childhood poverty of any major country? Were we going to bail out those families? I didn't hear that from the White House. Mr. President, over 7 million Americans have lost their health insurance. More than 4 million Americans have lost their pensions. Over 3 million manufacturing jobs have been lost. Total consumer debt has more than doubled since President Bush has been in office. Median income for working-age Americans has gone down by over $2,000 after inflation. Where has the Bush administration been in bailing out those families? Where has the Bush administration been in saying we are going to provide health care to all Americans? I didn't hear them come forward. But when it is AIG, when it's Bear Stearns, my goodness, how quickly they respond. If you're a CEO of a large insurance company, they are there for you. But if you're a working mother whose kid does not have any health insurance, I'm sorry, we can't afford to take care of you. For working families, seniors, children, veterans, the unemployed, their problems do not warrant, apparently, an urgent response from the President. But big insurance companies, big investment houses, companies that get engaged in risky subprime lending and credit swaps, my, how quickly we respond there. Mr. President, the American people deserve better. We need to reject the failed economic policies and priorities of George W. Bush and John McCain. Americans need a government that is not going to let the rich and large corporations loot our economy. Americans need a government that will put regulatory firewalls back up in the financial sector and end the use of unregulated credit swaps. Americans need a government that is going to prevent speculators from robbing them at the gas pump. Americans need a government that breaks up companies that are too big to fail. Americans need a government that is going to view their problems as seriously as they view the problems of corporate America. Mr. President, our job is to give the American people that kind of government.